every year at Father's Day, these feelings and thoughts flood back into me, even though I'm somewhat advanced in my years compared to my life as a little boy growing up in Deer Park. But it's very intimate to me, and it's colored and governed almost every aspect of my life since I was 12 or 13 years old. And that is my relationship with my father, how the relationship ended, how he tried to rekindle that relationship, and that because of my personal failure in accepting when he reached out to me, over all the years of my life from that point until now, when Father's Day comes, I think back in my own mind as to what I did wrong. That hopefully will be an instruction for you. What I want this segment of the show to be about this Friday afternoon is there are many fathers, sons, and daughters who have become estranged over the years, generally because of the behavior of the parent. And there are good parents and there's bad parents. There's good moms and there's bad moms. I think there's few of them, but nonetheless. And there are good fathers and there's bad fathers. I had a saint for a mother and a sinner for a father. I probably realized when I was 8, 9, 10 years old that my father had a drinking problem because it was on his breath constantly. His behavior changed. I'm sure he thought in his own mind he did not change his behavior, and his breath did not smell of alcohol. But to those of us, the 4 children of Bill and Mary Ellen Cunningham, we knew at the time what was going on. And as you get to be 8, 9, and 10, you don't talk about it much. It is simply the elephant in the room, not discussed. I can recall growing up in Deer Park and that my father had jobs at Kroger and Procter & Gamble in St. Bernard. But over the years, he lost those jobs because of alcoholism. He was a good employee who often would show up sick or drunk or not do his job for a while because of the alcohol addiction. And in those days, alcoholism was not considered a disease, as it is today by some. But in those days, it was a human, a moral failing. And he was extremely difficult to live with all the days of my life until I was about 12 years old. I can recall in the local newspaper, which was called the Sycamore Messenger, I think now it's called the Northeast Suburban Life, there were a little bit of headlines saying Cunningham arrested for a DUI, Cunningham sent to jail, Cunningham this and Cunningham that. And his name was Bill Cunningham. I was named after him. And so at school at times, some of my classmates, being cruel as kids sometimes are, would reference the fact that Bill Cunningham got arrested. Bill Cunningham went to jail, something of that character. And it went on for years. There was a point when I was 12 or 13 where my mother sat us down, the 4 children, and said to us at the kitchen table, with all the drama that had been going on for many years, most of which she shielded from us, she said that your father is not coming home. Now, up to that point, I was named after him, which was a sense of pride for me. He was also my baseball coach from the time I was 5 until I was 12 or 13. I was intimately involved in his life, and, you know, in sports, when you can play the games as well as I played the game, I had more stature perhaps in the family than others because I was the athlete in the family. The brilliance of my older brother John and my younger brother Pat and of my younger sister Diane Cunningham, Mary Diane, now Mary Diane Redden, is not nearly as exhibited as athletic prowess. So I was very close to him. And when she said, your father's not coming home anymore, I thought she meant for a day, a week, or a month. And she said, no, he's moved away and he's not coming back. And I know I thought, well, he'll be back. He always comes back. I know he's got some problems, but he'll be back. Well, he never came back. And I saw him the night before that conversation when I was 12 or 13. And I never laid eyes on him again the rest of my life. Years went by, about 15 years went by. And I can recall specifically standing in a kitchen, a very, very small kitchen, in Toledo, Ohio, with my wife, Penny, and my little boy, Evan. The phone rang, and Penny picked it up and said, it's for you. So I said, okay, picked up the phone, and the voice on the other end of the line said, Billy, this is your father. And 15 years had gone by. My heart sunk. I said, well, how do I know you're my father? He so asked me some questions. So I asked him some questions about baseball, various coaches, addresses, and he answered all the questions correctly. And at this point, my anger was arising, not subsiding. He said to me that he had moved to Illinois, started a new life in the state of Illinois, met another woman, and started a new life because he couldn't take any more living in Cincinnati. The guilt, the shame, and the lack of fathering. And I said to him, for 15 years, no birthday cards, no Christmas gifts. We all assumed he was dead, because how does a father of four, might I say, good kids, great kids, go through 15 years and never ever contact by telephone, by mail, by no personal means, no messages sent, nothing, 15 years. So after 5 or 10 minutes, he told me that he was dying of throat cancer, and he thought he also had cancer of the liver and the stomach, and that he only had, he thought, a few weeks or a few days to live. I could tell by a raspy voice that something was wrong, and that's why I didn't recognize his voice at all. So I said, what do you want? He said, well, I like to see you. You're my namesake. You're Bill Cunningham. I'm Bill Cunningham. I was your coach. I'm your father. I love you very much. And I would like to see you one time before I die. And I immediately said no. I said, Dad, you were not a father to me in my life, and I will not be a son to you in your death. Good luck and goodbye. And I hung up. About a minute went by, and I immediately called my mother. I said, Mom, you're not going to believe who just called me. And he said, I know, it's your dad. I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, he called here, and he specifically wanted your telephone number in Toledo. And I said, wow. I said, well, what do you think? So we spoke a little bit, and I know she was in pain, and she was torn about whether to go to Illinois or not to see him, her husband. They got married like about 1944, 1945. So they were together about 25 years when all this came down, and he left. And I said, Mom, look, if you want me to take you to Illinois, I will do it in a heartbeat. I don't care what I got going on. At that point, Penny and I were largely working hard, but we had no money. $5 or $10 was a lot of money. So I thought about gas money and who I could borrow it from to get there. But she said, no, Billy, Diane and her husband is going to take me, and I just as soon you not come. And I said, Mom, look, if you have an inkling that you want me there with you to see him for the last time, I'll do it in a heartbeat. And she said, no, I'd rather have you not. And so just stay there in Toledo, and we're going to go this weekend. I said, okay, Mom, no problem. A few days went by after that meeting. The phone rings again in my home, my little apartment in Toledo. And it was my dad again. And his voice was even, in a sense, raspier. And he said to me, Billy, this is your dad again. I really, really want to see you. I need to see you. And I said, Dad, forget it. I might have used some expletives, and I said, I'm not seeing you. Goodbye, and I hung up on him. I found out about 3 weeks later he, in fact, died of the cancer. And my mom wanted to go to the funeral. And I said, Mom, I'll go with you to the funeral. There's no problem. She said, Billy, I'd rather have you not go. We got Diane. I know how you feel about this. And I said, Mom, no, I'll come. I'll drive to Cincinnati, then drive to Illinois, which at the time was a big deal. And Mom said, no, I'm fine. So I talked to my sister, Diane. She said she got it handled, and I said, okay. A few years went by, and I'm at Willie's in Westchester. An older man comes up to me. This was like maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And he said, I knew a Bill Cunningham many years ago. And I looked at him, and I looked at him, he said, yeah, it was your father. I said, really? I said, well, tell me about my dad. He said, he's a great guy. God, he was gregarious. He was fun to be with. He could tell a joke. He had lots of great buddies. And I said, did you ever get an insight as to why he deserted 4 children at the ages of like 15, 13, 10, and 6? Good kids with a good woman. He said, I think I know why. And I said, please, tell me, what's the reason? He said, I think it was the war. And I said, you mean World War II? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said he was a grunt that went to Guadalcanal, hit the beaches. He ended up in February and March of 1945 in Iwo Jima. And by this point, I had seen the movie about Iwo Jima and what the Marines went through. 7,000 strong were killed in Iwo Jima. It's the greatest Marine loss of life in American history, and he was a Marine. And I said, oh my God. He said, when he came back from that war, he was never the same. He drank, did other things, philandering of one type or another, because it was like medicine to Bill, that he couldn't take it anymore. The things that he went through in war, it was over for him. And he said he felt so guilty. And the more he drank, the more guilty he became. He told me how great his kids were, and he said, especially you, Bill. He said the way you played baseball was the way he wanted to play baseball. And he was so close to you. And it really, really hurt him when you would not travel to Illinois to spend some time with him at the end of his life. And at that point, I felt about a half an inch tall. I thought I had failed my father. I failed my family, that it was personal to me, and that instead of accepting what surely would have been an apology and an explanation, that he left this earth with even more negative feelings about the dangers, the guilt, the harm that he had caused his family than he had before because of my recalcitrance, because of my inability as a relatively young man in my late 20s, early 30s, to give up the anger that I felt and to reach back to my father. I am certain, as I sit here this afternoon, that there are thousands and thousands of families around the tri-state and the nation that are estranged from your dad for one reason or another. It could be almost always it's parental misconduct. It could be alcohol. It could be drugs. It could be a personality disorder. It could be emotional deficits. It could be whatever. It could be physical or emotional abuse or harm that your dad inflicted upon you as a son or daughter, that you have never forgiven them. And I understand completely your feelings. But with Father's Day coming up on Sunday, I would urge you not to walk the path that I walked, but to take a different course. If I had to do it all over again when he contacted me and reached out to me after 15 years of no contact of any type, I would have gotten in my car, probably with my wife Penny, and drove to Illinois to find him, to sit across a table from him, and to have him explain to me what happened. Why did he do this to his saintly wife and to my loving mother? Why did he do this to me? And I anticipate he would have given me the excuse of Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal and the war. And I would have said that's no excuse, because many guys came back from that war. Many guys come back from this war in Iraq and Afghanistan without acting the way you behaved. Many did, but let's face it, some do not. The horrors he saw in the South Pacific was of such a character that almost self-medication would be an acceptable response. It's awful. So as I look back on my relationship with my dad, it colored everything I now do with my own son, Evan. I'm closer, maybe enabling, maybe loving, but whatever it is, whenever an issue arises, I think back to the relationship I had with my dad. And one thing I promised my son is that you will never see me drunk. And one thing I'm not going to do in my life is be an alcoholic or to abuse drugs, because I know the effect it has upon a family. So I would urge you to think about this today and tomorrow before Sunday. If you are estranged from your dad, if he's somewhere in a nursing home or somewhere living far away, across the street, across town, or across the country, do not walk the path that I walked. Seriously think about what happens during the living years if your dad tries to reach out to you, directly or indirectly, and you fail to take his hand. And the guilt that you may feel for all the days of the rest of your life if you do not reach back and say, Dad, why? Why did you do this to me? Do not let this moment pass. I'm going to spend a moment or two during the break getting my head back around this and get back together. And I want to thank you. When I relate this story every few years here on 700 WLW, I generally get lots of very positive responses and some negative ones. Sometimes people say to me, Bill Cunningham, look what you did to your dad. And all I can say to those people is, I understand what you're saying. And if I had it to do all over again, I would have performed much differently. And when I finally get to heaven, I hope I get there, and I pray my Father is there too, I want him to look him into the eyes one more time, to say, I'm sorry for what I did to you. Accept my apology. Now once again, Dad, be my Father. Bill Cunningham, 700 WLW.